Welcome to another episode of the Vanguard Wall podcast. This is one that I've definitely been looking forward to, so I hope you guys enjoy this conversation. I want to introduce my friend Pete McCarthy. Pete's been a longtime friend of mine, mentor, just a good example. Welcome, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, and thank you for everything you do to help other people, especially the veterans and law enforcement.
Appreciate that. I want to give you guys a quick intro, but before we do that, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, smash that subscribe button. If you like the content, like it, leave us a message. We read all of them. If you're on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you guys get your podcasts, make sure you subscribe. Leave us a message out there too. We check them all out. We've had an overwhelming amount of support, so I really appreciate you guys that are taking the time to tune in. So without further ado, Pete McCarthy graduated from Florida State. I said University of Florida earlier and I almost got stabbed, so I want to make sure I get that right. Definitely graduated Florida State.
Harvard of the South.
You did the ROTC program at Florida State. You were an air defense artillery officer in the mid 80s. That'll be an interesting, fun story to hear. After the military, you got out. You were a deputy U.S. Marshal in Miami. I think you got there, in 88?
Yes. Yeah,
that was the height of the cocaine wars for all you youngsters out there. That was a wild time in Miami and in the U.S. for that matter, but Miami was kind of the episode of the whole drug world back then. After the Marshals, you spent 31 years at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF. Definitely a controversial agency, so we're definitely excited to kind of hear your take on some stuff, and I know we have a bunch of viewers that will have some questions out there. You were a special agent over there. You were also a resident agent in charge of a field group, and then you retired as a branch chief. Kind of some of your notable, I mean, you've had a very long career, but some of the highlights: you were a plank holder and one of the early members of ATF's Special Response Team, or SRT as it's called in ATF, which is it's a SWAT team for all of you out there that don't know what SRT is. And then you were also a plank holder and one of the original members of ATF's Enhanced Undercover program, which is something we're definitely going to dive into, which is a pretty cool thing that I didn't know a whole lot about. You spent 29 years working undercover, that's a long time. You infiltrated multiple outlaw motorcycle gangs, became a captain in the Aryan Brotherhood. You were involved in multiple shootings, and you worked numerous long-term deep cover assignments that have resulted in the federal prosecution of multiple defendants. I know you got numerous awards and accolades for a lot of the things you did. I know you probably never tell anybody that stuff, but I know it. Most importantly, you were married for 40 years, or you're currently married, and you've been married for the last 40 years. That's definitely something I'd like to dive in on the backside of this podcast. I think that's something you don't hear of very often, so we'd love to know kind of some of your strategies and, you know, what has helped you stay married for 40 years. You have 2 extremely successful kids and 1 grandson. Does that about sum it up?
It does.
And you saved the entire planet. So we'll just kind of start, I'd like to kind of start at the beginning of your life and kind of work up from there. So tell us a little bit about, either where you're from or kind of your childhood.
My father was career military, and I came from a military family. My mom's dad was a Navy Seabee, World War II, was wounded. The Purple Heart was wounded during the invasion of Roy Island in the South Pacific. My uncle, his son, was a Marine. Uncle Butch, with a name like Butch, you've got to be a Marine, right?
Yeah.
And so I came from a military family, and I was exposed throughout my young life to military people, and even at that age, I was impressed, and I saw these people that served a calling much higher than their own, and they made sacrifices basically for the good of the country, and that's always something that always stuck with me, and something that I always appreciated. I have a lot of respect for veterans.
What was it like moving around every couple years?
Well, when you're younger, every 2 years we'd move. In the fall, in the springtime, you get your new orders, and as and when you're younger, it's not a big deal because you're a little kid and stuff. But then as you grow older, you move around, you build friendships, but then you're yanked up and you're dropped into another place. But it was very educational, and I think it in a way it maybe kind of helped me later on in life, as far as dropping into an environment that you don't know anybody and making friends, or and then popping out, kind of similar to working long-term undercovers. You know what I mean?
Ooh.
Yeah. So, and then in my junior high days, I guess called middle school now, or whatever. In my high school days, we settled into a small beach town on the east coast of Florida. That was an awesome place. Especially coming out of the DC area, into that environment, it was like heaven and hell, actually.
What were you into as a kid?
I was into everything. Played sports. Literally spent as much time as I could at the beach, getting in trouble. Typical kid stuff. Yeah.
Tell us about the time or the couple times you went to prison when you were a kid.
Well, there was a guy, God rest his soul, Lee Winter. He's passed away, but he ran the rec center, and he also was ran recreation programs in the two of the local prisons by where I lived. And he was a Golden Gloves boxer, great basketball player. So he arranged it. So some of the high school kids, the basketball players, would go down to the prison and play basketball games against the prisoners. And yeah, first time went to Indian River Correctional Institution, and then the second time we went up to Sharps. And things were a little different back then. We didn't even tell our parents. We just all got in the cars and rode down and played the prisoners in the prison in basketball games.
So I have two questions. One, did you guys win?
We did win, which kind of we had a guy. We had some great players, but we had a guy. One guy was like 6'8", 6'9", and yeah. I don't think they got much practice down there, but yeah, we did win, and that they weren't very happy about it. But we won the first one, and then we won the second one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you were telling me you guys won the first game, so they let you eat at the chow hall.
As a reward, yeah, we got to go into the prison chow hall and eat some good prison food, and it was quite apparent because you go in there, slam the door closed on you, but it was consensus was that, hey, no matter what we do the rest of our lives, we don't want to end up here.
Maybe that's why he wouldn't let you play basketball at the Y.
It was kind of a kinder, gentler version of Scared Straight.
Yeah, that's funny. So you graduate high school and then off to Florida State.
Yeah, when I was the senior year, they call you into the counselor's office and say, "Hey, what do you?" As a group, they ask you, "What do you want to do?" And we had deputy sheriffs that would patrol right up and down the beach, and I thought, man, that'd be a great job, man. Just hang out, drive up and down the beach. Help people fix their flat tires. I didn't have a real concept of what law enforcement, everything they did. So, yeah. And at the time, Florida State had a top-notch criminology program. I'm sure they still do now. Like everything else they have is top-notch. And so I decided to set my sights on going to Tallahassee. And so I went up there. And when I got up there, I realized, hey, I'm going to need some more money to stay up here. So I had a good buddy of mine. He was majoring in cinematography. I was majoring in criminology. So at the time, I don't know how it is now, but the Army ROTC office was in the same building as the Air Force ROTC office. And so we thought, hey, we'll go over there to the Air Force. They'll scoop us up and, we'd be fighter pilots or something really cool. So we went over to meet with the Air Force. They asked us what our majors were, and then they politely said, hey, could you guys close the door on your way out? And just like a movie, right across the hallway, here comes the Army ROTC cadre right? Like, hey, what are you guys doing? You know, and hey, you guys want to come out and shoot M16s and rappel from towers and stuff? And we're like, well, that's pretty cool. So we started getting involved with them. And actually, the first gun I ever fired in my life, at the time, Florida State had a gun range under the football stadium at the school there. So my first gun I ever fired, we went down under the football stadium on the rifle range, and I fired the M16. And then that kind of got involved in that. They were doing a lot of good high speed stuff. They had great connections with Fort Benning, so we had access to a lot of stuff. You know, helicopters, that type of stuff, and it was really cool experience. And I served with I learned a lot, man. Even more about self-sacrifice, and I served with some fantastic people, and excuse me, and you know, and in the war on terror, some of those guys I served with were killed. Yeah, so it was a great experience, and set the tone. Basically, one of the things that set the tone.
Nice. So how did you end up in air defense?
Well, when you go through ROTC, you do sign a contract. I was getting $100 a month, which paid half of my rent. I had an apartment for $200 a month.
The good old days.
Which I'd like to say it was nice, but that'd be a lie. And so you sign a contract with them. That once you get to your junior year, you sign a contract with them. And then you go through all the training and all that stuff, and the summer operations training, and then you're ranked by your performance. So I'd put in for two different branches and like 4 different locations. And the day you get commissioned, they give you an envelope with where you're going and what you're going to do. And I got none of my choices based on my outstanding or not outstanding performance. And I got orders to go to Fort Richardson, Alaska.
Glad it wasn't Arkansas.
Yeah, which that's another story. I read it and originally thought it said Fort Richardson AK, and I thought, geez, I'm going to Arkansas. My sister, I called her on the phone and just read it to me. And she goes, "That's not Arkansas, that's Alaska, you idiot." And I was even more angry, but because I had put in for all beach locations or California and East Coast beach locations, but I got neither. But one of the best things that ever happened to me was going to Alaska, and it was incredible what I learned and what I saw up there. And I was assigned to the 5th Battalion, 327th Infantry, 172nd Light Infantry Brigade. Shout out to them, Arctic Warriors. Yep.
Yeah. How was it like up there, man? Was it, straight up Arctic or?
Oh, hell yeah. For a 22-year-old kid from Florida, 22-year-old kid from Florida, it was night and day, man. But it was incredible. It was like the movies, you know what I mean? It was beautiful, but rugged. And we were in it was a pretty high speed, battalion, brigade, you know what I mean? A lot of the chain of command was prior Ranger Battalion, and and moved up or transferred up, and so it was for, like I said, a kid from the 20-year-old kid from Florida who had never been exposed to it. It was outstanding. It was challenging as hell, but like I said, I met some great people, worked with great people. 2 of the people I worked with up there ended up playing roles in Black Hawk Down. If you ever saw the movie Black Hawk Down, it was Lee Van Arsdale and Sergeant Ray Dowdy. Sergeant Dowdy was in Super 6-1, the plane that crashed, the chopper that crashed, and Colonel Van Arsdale was one of the leaders of the operation. And even back then, they both had great reputations. And Sergeant Dowdy, long story short, he grew up in the same town I did. And my first time I went downtown, get a beer or whatever, some guy's knocking on my door, and it was him, wanting to know where I was from. And then he was an E5 at the time, crew chief on the helicopters. He basically took me in. He'd been overseas to Germany and everything, and and he's kind of schooled me on the real Army stuff, and he took care of me. He taught me how to reload ammunition, and it was just really went out of his way to educate me and look after me. And I remember he called me. I was leaving. Eventually I left and went back I went to Fort Bliss, but he called me and said, "Hey, I'm going to this super secret unit, top notch unit," and that was the Night Stalker unit. I didn't think anything about it. I said, "Hey, God bless, let me know, keep in touch." And the next thing I know, several years later, we lost being in touch. We didn't have texting and all that stuff. And then several years later, a mutual friend calls me and says, "Hey, did you hear what happened to Ray? He was in the Black Hawk Down, shot down helicopters, and just a great guy. He survived, of course. He was injured. So I learned so much up there about leadership, discipline, and just overcoming everything. I mean,
So you were a platoon leader in a Stinger platoon, right?
Stinger platoon leader in an infantry battalion.
For all of you that don't know, a Stinger is a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile. So if you're on the ground, you could fire a Stinger and take out helicopters.
Aircraft, yes. Yep.
I know, I think mid-'80s, that's the Cold War still going on. Was that still a thing?
Yes. Yeah.
So, and I know there was a lot of stuff going on. The Russians, you told a cool story about a recon team leader.
Our recon team, we had a recon team in our battalion, and the recon platoon leader was a friend of mine, and he'd been gone for a while, and so he came back. I was like, "Hey man, where you been? What's going on?" He says, "Well, they had at that time they had Russian Spetsnaz, which is their special forces soldiers, were conducting training actually on U.S. territory, right on the border of Alaska and the United States. I mean, right on the border of Alaska and Russia. But they were crossed over training in Alaska. So they went up. The recon team went up for a couple of weeks and shadowed them and documented or whatever they did and came back.
But that wasn't a sanctioned training event for the U.S., was it?
No, absolutely, absolutely not. No, it's all they went up there clandestine and kept an eye on what the Spetsnaz was doing.
So you end up leaving Alaska and you go to Fort Bliss. What were you doing down at Bliss?
Fort Bliss at the time, like you said, Stinger was a hot button issue all over the world. It was incredibly accurate, easy to operate, easy to learn how to operate. Everybody wanted it, and so every 2 weeks, I was the officer in charge. We'd run a live fire exercise every 2 weeks. We were graduating classes every 2 weeks, and you'd run the live fire range, and we'd fire the Stinger, the Chaparral, and the Vulcan. Those were all anti-aircraft weapon systems. And so I'd run those ranges, and kind of one of the funny things at the time, I'll tell you how times have changed, we would go to the ammo supply point, the ASP. We would pick up all these Stinger missiles and all these other missiles and rounds for the live fire, and we just get in a deuce and a half. We'd have a Jeep in the front, deuce and a half in the middle, and a Jeep in the back. We just drive down the highway. We had nobody was armed. We had some PRC 77 radios, but other than that, just driving down the highway, loaded to the gills.
Bunch of missiles.
Yeah, things you wouldn't see that nowadays. But so we involved in training different agencies, different entities, and in transferring the Stingers to be used. And one of the groups we trained was the Pakistanis, and they trained with us, and they were trained up, and then Stingers were eventually transferred to the Pakistanis, turned over to the Mujahideen, and the Stingers. If you ever see Charlie Wilson's War, the movie, the Stingers changed the outcome of the war in Afghanistan.
It's kind of, is it interesting to look back and know that you played a part in that?
It was really interesting, but you didn't really at the time. It's just like you're just doing your job, like any other MOS or everything. Yeah, but it was interesting. I mean, you had people show up to use the training simulators and stuff, and guys would show up. Where's your ID? And be a guy with a library card from Cincinnati or something, and I'd call the S3. S3 is the operations guy I reported to for the whole. They call the S3. Hey, this guy's here, and he's got a library card from Cincinnati. He's got one, first name of Joe or something. He goes, let him in. There's a lot of stuff going on, and which was great. Like I said, another, great for me as well. I enjoyed it and felt like you were doing something. You know what I mean?
So, your term in the military's coming towards the end. You're deciding to make that career change. How did you end up at the Marshal's office?
Excuse me. So, back in the day, before cell phones, when you used the regular phone, they used to have a phone book. In the phone book, all the federal agencies were in the blue pages. So I just went to the blue pages, and I just went down the blue pages, and I started calling all the agencies and said, hey, just get out of the Army, criminology degree, you guys hiring? And, and somebody at the Marshal's office was foolish enough to return my call or whatever. And so I got tested, went to Miami, took the test, and then passed the test and was interviewed, and I was hired to be Deputy U.S. Marshal.
So you get to Miami, it's what, 1988?
1988, yes.
Yeah, so that's the straight up cocaine wars. If you guys ever watched the old Miami Vice, it's on and popping. What was that like?
It was crazy. I mean, they were moving an average of 100 inmates a day, prisoners a day, bringing them in from the MCC down in South Miami to the courthouse, and we were handling some of the biggest drug traffickers in the history of the United States, and it was off the hook, it's just like the shows and the movies. Everybody, Miami was just out of control, saturated with cocaine, and the violence that comes with it. It was great. It was awesome. It was also a great learning experience because you were always with these inmates too. You would process them, you would transport them, so you would learn from them. You know what I mean? Like you'd have to take a guy across to the other side of the state for court. You know what I mean? A prisoner, and along the way, you got to you and your partner and him in the car, and hey, so what are you in for? And you just start talking. A lot of guys, I mean, they were very, very polite, but they tell you their whole criminal story, and nothing that would implicate them, but for the most part. But so you learned a lot about how they operated and how they acted. You know what I mean? So it was another great learning experience. Any notable people that the audience would recognize? Maybe? Oh yeah, I mean, like the guy from Blow, we moved him. I mean, you just moved all the big wigs, and then one of the biggest ones we had. Was General Noriega, when they took him into custody. And so me and my partner, Matt, we were running the car delivery. Long story short, but it's just a car. We would take the inmates to different places. And then we got back late one night, park the cars, go up to the main office, open the main office door, and it's a cast of hundreds in there. And as the doors opened, the people there looking at us like, who the hell are these guys? And me and Matt looking like, who the hell are these guys? And basically, they were arranging to go pick up Noriega that was being delivered on an airplane down at Homestead. And so the SOG, the Special Operations Group from the Marshals, top-notch tactical teams, they were there. And they said, hey, if these two guys are from here, why don't we have them drive the two vans that the SOG teams are going to be in. So we're just by luck, we were allowed to participate in picking him up, General Noriega, and picking him up and moving him up to a safe house in Miami. And then, of course, afterwards, you always work the details, security details at the safe house. So I got to spend a lot of time with him and so many other high profile defendants in the safe house.
think you were talking about the story of when you guys had just picked up Noriega from the airport and you're driving them to the safe location, and people drove like idiots in Miami. Tell that story.
Yeah, and it was kind of crazy. So we're coming up and we're getting into the flow of traffic, and some wise guy from Miami decides he doesn't want to let us over. And next thing, all I see is about 10 fully automatic rifles, machine guns on both sides of the vans pop open, and with the windows. And then this guy sees them and then just peels off into the side of the road and ends up going off into the woods. Yeah, crashing. But the SOG was not playing around. I was very impressed with the Marshal Special Operations.
I mean, we pretty much just overthrew the Panamanian government, had their main leader, so I'm sure the tension was a little.
Oh, that guy was very lucky. It could have ended very badly. Yeah.
Cool. Any other small tidbits from the time with the Marshals that?
I'll just tell you this Noriega story. Okay. So there was a safe house. There was a girl that would work for the Marshals. She was not law enforcement, but she would clean the safe house. And she would go to night school. So the guy that was running the WITSEC program was a legend. He had been involved in all the old prisoner swaps, and he just had a reputation of being a legend. And he was a tough guy. He was an ex-DC, Washington, D.C. cop, and a great guy, treated everybody, the troops good. So he asked the young lady, what are you still doing here? You got night school. And she goes, well, I still got to clean General Noriega's room. He said, give me that vacuum cleaner. And he says, Pete, come on down. Come with me. And so we walked into the general's office, the general's quarters, and he's got his uniform hanging up and everything. And this legend takes the vacuum cleaner and pushes it over to the general and tells him, hey, vacuum your room. And General Noriega smiles and starts vacuuming the room.
That's funny, man. No longer a dictator in charge of anything.
No.
You can clean your own room.
Yeah, clean your own room. Yeah, how the mighty have fallen, right?
So how did ATF get on your radar?
So one of the main things that the Marshals do is they do court security. They handle security for trials. And so you go in to sit in trials, and provide security to the judges and to the whole operation. And at the time, like, you would have different types of trials. I mean, they're all criminal trials, but like the big doper trials, you'd have these multimillionaire, gazillionaire dopers would come in. They'd be in custody, but they'd be dressed to the nines, professional. Everything was mellow, right? But it just seemed, you spend enough time in the courtrooms, there was always some twist to the ATF cases. It was always violence. Of course, guns were involved, shootings. It was just, you always perked up and you always had to be on the ball for the ATF cases, because they dealt with the worst of the worst. It was very educational, but it could turn into a circus. Yeah, dangerous circus at times. But yeah, so that's what I was like, man, I could do that. I see these agents would come bring great cases to prosecute, and I thought I could do that.
Yeah, I think you and I were talking yesterday, and it was kind of one of those things. Like, I know everybody in the Marshals wants to be on the Warrant squad because that's where all the action is. But Miami was a big field office, and
right, yeah, there was 5 full-time warrant slots, and warrants is where you go out, of course, and serve warrants and hunt down fugitives. And it's a great job, but only 5 slots, and your radio number was mine was like 78. So I had 77 people in front of me that would have the option to get a warrant slot. So it was going to be a long time before I got a warrant slot full time.
So how did you get on with the ATF?
Well, they had a posting for a hiring for ATF. It was just for the state of Florida. So I saw that, and it had the recruiter's name on there. So I would constantly call the recruiter. Every time I had a bad day in court, I got tired of sitting in the court or whatever, I would call the recruiter. And the recruiter finally called me back. He said, come on in, I'll give you an interview. So I took the interview, and eventually I got hired. That recruiter turned out to be my boss. And he told me, I'll tell you what, the only reason I gave you a chance he says, interview was because you bugged the hell out of me. You kept calling me, pissing me off. I said, I'm going to get this idiot in here, give him his interview, and then kick him to the curb, and I'll never hear from this guy again. Well, it worked out where I guess he lied enough to him, and he believed it, so they hired me. And that guy was my supervisor. And he was an armored combat veteran, Vietnam, and one of the best guys I've known, and a leader. He was a leader. And he was involved in all kinds of stuff as an ATF supervisor. He was responsible for a lot of the success because he trusted his men and women, and he let them do their job, and he let them run. You know what I mean? And shout out goes to Jim Fearson.
It's a great story about persistence. Sometimes, people try to do things, they do it one time and they just give up. I had similar experiences throughout my life and my career where, I was told no, or you can't do this thing. And, you think if you have dreams and hopes and you chase those vigorously, I think there's a reward in that. So that's kind of a cool little tidbit to pull out of that story. Yeah, so that's cool. So you end up getting on to ATF. But before I kind of go into that story, there was something that I forgot to ask you about earlier. I know you had a pretty traumatic incident when you were in your 20s going to college that kind of would impact you later on into wanting to go after violent crime. Tell our listeners what happened in the Philippines.
Well, like I said, my dad was career military, and he was stationed in the Philippines, and what they do is Christmas time. I was in college. It was Christmas time, so they flew me to the Philippines to spend Christmas time with my dad and my mother. So, never been there before. It was like probably 65 degrees when I left Tallahassee. Get out to the Philippines, like 80 degrees, balmy, going to the beach. It was awesome. Great place to hang out and have fun especially for a 20-year-old kid, So I meet a couple other guys that they were stationed there. So we decided it was New Year's Eve. We said, we'll go out, celebrate New Year's Eve. So we're ending up the night. We decided to go stop by this bar where we had a friend that worked at the bar, said, hey, wish the friend Happy New Year's, and we'll head back to the base. No big deal. Everything was good to go. So we come out of the bar, and we're kind of, all of a sudden we're surrounded, probably about 10 plus males, Filipino males. Kind of get that feeling like what's going on. Long story short, basically they whipped our ass, beat the hell out of us. We ran to these jitneys, which are motorcycles with sidecars, tried to get away from them. As we're trying to get away from them, one of the guys rolls up in a van, unloads 45 caliber pistol in our direction, and two of the basically I'm hit in the legs. I have 4 holes in my legs from the 45 caliber, and as we're sitting there trying to get our thoughts together, another wave of them came and trying to beating us with sticks and poles and trying to stab us with these cane cutting knives. And so we said, hey, we're not going to be able to talk our way out of this. And basically we just took off, went different directions. And I ended up being rescued by a local family, Filipino family, and then taken to the emergency room and then stabilized, and then I got hopped to medevac the next couple of days, and then eventually ended up back in Florida. And as a young man back then, unfortunately, the way it is now, our society, there wasn't a lot of people getting shot. I mean, where I came from, so it was to me, kind of tripped me out because I was just a kind of happy-go-lucky kid, and I wasn't doing anything. We didn't do anything, and it just kind of blew my mind. Like, how could one human being just pick up a gun and shoot another human being that they didn't even know, that didn't do anything to them? And it stayed with me for quite a while. It bothered me, and it kind of also was a motivator for what I later became. And I'm not saying it's a bragging way, but I would get up I was going to even the score somehow. And I went to work every day, and my objective was to take as many bad guys off the street, shooters off the street as I could. And that kind of fueled my fire for the next 25 years or whatever. That wasn't, like I said, another motivator, another driver. It was always a driver for me throughout my career.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's been lost in the media, especially in today's age, as far as what ATF's mission actually is. It's really been convoluted by people on the internet, but ATF's main mission is going after trigger pullers and firearms traffickers. This whole narrative of ATF coming to take your guns, I think, in you and I talking, that's a joke in the agency. It's pretty comical because ATF's the smallest agency at the Department of Justice. There's only 2,500 or so agents. They haven't had a personnel increase since their inception. So this idea that ATF's going after mom and pop, some dude who made a mistake on a form or some, crazy thing like that. I mean, ATF's mission is to prosecute violent criminal offenders and get guns off the street that actually kill people. Was that your experience?
Yes. I mean, that was exactly. And we would always target violent criminals that were using firearms. And you have limited resources. And then eventually I went on to be a supervisor as well towards the end of my career. But you have limited resources and funding. So you don't want to expend all your resources and funding on the bottom feeders. You want to go after the trigger pullers, the violent criminals that are tearing apart their communities, and that was what we always, basically everybody, that was the motivator. That's how we operated. And if you didn't go after the violent criminals, you tried to get what they called roadkill, which was an easy case you could put together in a half hour. Those were really usually denied or they were frowned upon, and you were ridiculed by your other agents. You know what I mean? So it was very competitive when I was in, and I'm sure it still is now. So you would hear about guys doing a case on the East Coast, and you'd be like, "Oh, I want to do that. I want to do what this guy did." You wanted to make an impact. You wanted to have the big investigations and into the violent criminals.
Yeah, and I know that's what you did. I think we're starting down your early part of your career, but I know you spent your entire career going after criminal organizations, guys that, organizations that thrived on violence and racketeering and, tearing cities apart by means of violence. So I just kind of wanted to set that record straight. That's something I've learned from you through the years. And I think ATF, it's a really bad rap probably in the media. Probably because they don't do themselves justice as far as press releases and telling the citizens what they really do on a day-to-day basis. But we are partnered very well with local agencies and departments that really liked working.
And it's a great opportunity. I mean, I had many great opportunities, not just me, but all of us. ATF works as a great team nationwide and internationally now. But it's a great opportunity to make a difference in the communities that you live in, or I always thought about the young lady that was working 2 a.m. at 7-Eleven, and some violent criminals go in and stick a gun in her face, and just imagine I imagine what it does to her. I was a recipient of that type of treatment. Not to that degree, but it motivated me, and it was great because you could be part of a solution. There's a lot of things going on that now that you can't change, you can't make a difference in. But when you had a gun and a badge and worked for ATF and other federal agencies as well, you could utilize that, and you could actually make a difference. Because when you take somebody off the street for 15, 20 years, that guy or girl or the criminal's never going to be able to pull the trigger on innocent people in the community. And it makes a huge impact. And I think that's something that's underplayed. By whatever, different media, different sources, but it's critical, in my opinion, that America knows what ATF does. I mean, they have some of the best trained arson explosives investigators, and criminal investigators it was a great experience. I'm thankful that I was able to participate and hopefully made a difference.
Yeah. Well, I think people are going to kind of hear. So back in those days when you came on ATF, this is, circa 1990. Did you go straight to the academy or?
Back in those days, yeah, you would be sworn in, and they'd give you your gun and your badge, and then you'd have a training officer, and you would basically be married to that training officer, and everywhere that training officer went, you would go with them and you would learn. And then as slots came open at the academy, then you would rotate in and go to the academy and graduate from the academy and get your final blessing. But now I believe they do it a different way. You get hired on and you go straight to the academy. But the old way afforded many opportunities for especially there was people that came on with me that had no law enforcement experience, but it was just jumping right into the fire. You know what I mean? And it was a great learning tool.
Did you start working undercover before you actually went to the academy?
Yeah, I did. I did one. No, I'm sorry. I came back from the academy, and I did when I did my first undercover.
I know you got in a whole bunch of shootings while you were in ATF, or you were involved in cases that had shootings or were present during those. Tell us about your first one.
Well, the first shooting I was involved in, there was a huge problem in Miami with people robbing drug stash houses. There's a ton of cocaine coming in. They had to put it somewhere. There was these other group of individuals that would find where the houses were at and go in and rob the drug stash houses. And a lot of times during the robberies, innocent people were killed. They got the wrong house or whatever, but it was a huge problem. So some of the agents in Miami developed a strategy to target these individuals that were doing some of these home invasions, called stash house home invasions. So I had an informant and had a Metro-Dade police officer, a detective, Jeff Lewis, which was assigned, worked with me on this case. And came time for the takedown. What we do is, well, I'm not going to go into details, but came time for the takedown and the arrest. It turned out to these guys, the three individuals that showed up to rob the drug stash house didn't want to be arrested. So a shooting ensued. And at the time, I was off behind a berm in a telephone pole with Detective Lewis, and the shots started being fired. And one of the things I first remembered was I was trying to hide behind the telephone pole, and I have such a big head, the telephone pole wouldn't conceal my whole head. I thought, this is ridiculous. And my wife was pregnant with my first child. And I thought, this is crazy. I'm out here and this is going to hell pretty fast. And I thought maybe I should look into selling insurance or something. So as the action continues, one of the defendants was a big dude, and he was dressed all in black, and he broke through the perimeter and he came running straight at me. And he was about 6'5", big dude. And he was running so fast, and I thought, this guy's going to run right into me, run me over if I don't shoot him. So I drew my gun, and I couldn't have had a better picture sight frame. I pointed it, and all I could see was his black uniform or clothes he was wearing as he was running at me. So as I was trained to do, I squeezed the trigger and boom, dropped him. Right, he went right to the ground like a sack of potatoes. I thought, man, that's crazy. I just shot my first person. So we get the site contained. Everything's safe. An agent was shot and transported to the hospital. He was okay after he received medical attention. Process the scene. Go over. We put cuffs on everybody, on the target, on the bad guys. And I asked the guy that I thought I shot. I said, "Hey, where you shot?" He goes, "I wasn't shot." What are you talking about? You could not ever have a better shot picture and an opportunity, clear shot at somebody, and I couldn't even hit him. That was my opening to my first time of
Wow, and I know training has changed a lot too, but I mean, I know classically across, law enforcement. I know at one point, I haven't looked at the statistics in a while, but it was like most law enforcement encounters, shooting encounters are within, I think 7 yards or might even be 7 feet. And I know like there's a high percentage of people that miss because it's stress. Like they're going, like it's a whole stress inoculation. Were those guys all armed?
Yes. And they all ended up, 3 of them all ended up going to prison for life. Oh. And thank God the agent was okay after, like I said, after he was treated.
Yeah, I can't imagine those are wild times in Miami. I know. I remember watching the news. I'm a little bit younger, so I remember seeing like all the news cases, and I remember watching Miami Vice later on, and just seemed like it was crazy. It's probably Fast and Furious.
It was crazy. It was like cocaine was literally flying out of the sky. And I had an informant that called me he was out in Biscayne Bay fishing, and he called me ship to shore radio and said, "Hey, I just found 11 kilos of cocaine floating in the bay." I said, "Okay, get off the radio. I'll come down and I'll meet you at the marina." Go down there. He's got 11 kilos of cocaine. And so I start calling the law enforcement agencies. "Hey, we got 11 kilos. You want it? Coast Guard wouldn't take it. DA wouldn't take it because there's no bodies." So we ended up turning over 11 kilos of cocaine to the street narcotics unit for the city of Miami police. It was just off the hooks. Man.
Yeah, 11 kilos was just like small time back then.
Yeah, it was enough to get them to come out. Yeah.
I know there's a whole bunch of other cases that you did. We won't be able to highlight every one, but I know the Santeria case was a pretty interesting case. I thought that would be a cool story to tell.
Yeah, Santeria is a Caribbean religion, and a lot of the Cuban expatriates or the Cubans are worship in the Santeria. And we had a opportunity. There was a couple of Cuban expatriates that were stockpiling firearms and explosives. They would stash them in the Bahamas, and the reason they were doing it was they were waiting for the return to Cuba to take over Cuba. And so they would stash them out there. But these guys, they had machine guns, pipe bombs, all kinds of dangerous weapons and explosives in a community, So we had a female agent in our group, fantastic. She was actually received awards during the invasion of Panama. She was a CID officer, and one of the generals came under fire, and she basically saved the general's life. She was decorated, and she was just a fantastic agent. So anyway, long story short, she assumed an undercover role as the wife of one of our informants, and they were going to try to buy weapons and the explosives from these two guys. Well, they were Babalaos, or priests in the Santeria religion, and they wouldn't deal with anybody until those people had been blessed and vetted in the Santeria religion. And it was also a way to check out their credentials and see what they were all about. So they had basically a church service. It was a 3-day church service and vetting of the undercover agent and the informant. And so she had to do a lot of stuff for the vetting and during the ceremony, and several of them were like, she had to bite the head off a live doves and stuff like that, and a lot of tests that were kind of macabre and gross. But anyway, she went through the weekend like a champion, did her job, and as soon as they had the final bell ringing for the ceremony, they came out and said, "Hey, look, you guys are good to go. Now you're blessed, and you passed the test." And the next day, they started delivering weapons and explosives to her in an undercover capacity. It was unique, and a unique technique to target these people, but it was very successful, and she was awesome.
How many defendants that case ended up?
That was 2 defendants, 3 defendants actually. It was the 2 targets and the wife of one of the targets. Yeah, and one of the targets had actually shot his own daughter prior to that during an argument with his wife. And at the time, that was early on in the time, and I just say this too because a lot of people say, "Well, can females do undercover or couldn't?" Of course. at the time, she did face some kickback from some of the guys in ATF, and like one guy came to me and said, "Hey, I should be doing the undercover." She's doing. I said, "You're going to play the part of a wife, a female?" Yes, it was just ridiculous, just jealousy, and she was new, but she did a great job, and it's a very unique case.
Shout out to all those female undercovers out there.
Oh, definitely.
I know one of the other big cases that probably got a lot of press back then, and another case we've talked about is when you guys did the Brotherhood OMG case.
Right.
Tell us about that, kind of how it started and how it progressed, how you got involved, and kind of, what that case was all about and the outcome.
Well, the Outlaws Motorcycle Club has always controlled the state of Florida. And the Brotherhood was a group, several New Yorkers, ties to New York, documented ties to organized crime individuals out of New York. So they were just basically, I guess they decided to put up a Hells Angels chapter in South Florida, which wouldn't have worked out well. The actual war between the Outlaws and the Hells Angels started in the 70s, early 70s in South Florida, when some Hells Angels came down. They asked permission to come down. They came down. They were coming down to remove a patch from an ex-member that was kicked out of the club up north. So the Outlaws told him, "Hey, come on down east, no problem. As a matter of fact, come on out and party with us." And it ended up the Outlaws tied those guys up, took them out to a rock quarry in Broward County and executed them. And that's really kicked off the war between the Outlaws and the Hells Angels. So then now the Hells Angels were, these guys were trying to put a Hells Angels chapter in Broward County. So
was the Brotherhood a feeder club for HA?
Yeah. And it was so I had an informant. Once again, informants are vital to our mission. And the informant and another agent, and we basically infiltrated the club, documented evidence of and basically made buys, and that ran about a year. And then at the end, we took everybody off and shut that club down.
How did you end up working undercover in that case?
Well, we did our research at first, and this group just stood out. They had some characters, and they were involved in some violent stuff, robbing of drug dealers. There you go again, right? South Florida, robbing of drug dealers. They had a defense attorney that would give them information when they get clients that come in, have been arrested for drug trafficking. He would turn the information over to these guys, some of the guys from the club, and they would take these guys, kidnap them, take them out to the Everglades, and rip off their money and their dope. So we figured out a way to go into it. The CI I had was from New York, and he had tattoos on his arm, said New York, and so we took apart a piece of a motorcycle that needed some work done. So we went up to the shop owner, who was the president, said, "Hey, we need some work done," and then it started from there. We saw the guys from New York say, "Hey, come on by the clubhouse," and so on, and then we just started hanging out and became members of the club. Like I said, documented criminal activity, and then did the arrest and shut the club down.
So, I mean, were you like living a whole undercover persona, or?
Yeah, you had undercover residence and backstopping and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you explain to like some of the listeners kind of like the intricacies of what it was like to work undercover against the Brotherhood, and kind of, because you still had other cases that you were working, but I mean, this was in this in and of itself was a full-time job, but you were still doing other stuff while you were working undercover. Oh,
sure. You still have other responsibilities, and at the same time, I was a member of the SRT, it's a SWAT team, so I still would fulfill that obligation. And basically with the brother, it was night and day. You were at their beck and call, Because
you started off as a prospect in the chapter, right?
Yes. And so it's just being with them all the time, and not just that, you're hanging with those guys. It was it's all total negative and criminal activity, but you're also targets of other gangs. You know what I mean? Like we went to Bike Week and one time in Daytona, and the outlaws were beefing us, and it got kind of heated. Luckily, there was a cover team that was able to intercede in an undercover capacity and shut that down. But yeah, it was always a threat, either from the club finding out who you were or other clubs, that they were having conflict with.
Was there any other, anybody else covering you on that case?
Yeah, we had cover teams. We had a case agent, a cover team, and Matt did a great job of covering our back. Yeah, so it's all set up.
Was there another agent with you that was?
Yes, there was.
How did that, so how did you guys, what was the day-to-day thing like?
Well, you first of all, you go to the ATF office, do all your reports and everything, get your money out, make buys on stuff, and then you go hang with these guys. And then till late at night party and stuff, and then back to home or back to the undercover house, and then up and same thing, because you always had to do your report writing and all that stuff and documentation of evidence and putting evidence into the evidence vault and stuff. So it was very time consuming, away from the family, once again, but the results, it's very demanding and you wonder, hey, sometimes you're sitting there, hey, is this going to be worth it? But the results of that case were very, very rewarding, and it accomplished the mission. There's still no Hells Angels chapter in South Florida, so it kind of worked out.
What was it like working undercover? I mean, you're spending hours, hanging out with motorcycle gang members and just being in that environment, which is, the opposite of being married with a kid at home in a normal life. What was that like to turn that on and off? Especially, a lot of people don't understand what it takes to work undercover, especially in a long-term undercover like you were doing on this case. What's that like to turn that off and on?
Well, it's kind of weird because you're trying to be that person, trying to be a bad guy, putting so much effort into it, and it can consume you. You know what I mean? And you're under a lot of stress, lack of sleep, and pressure to produce to some degree. But like, I was not a motorcycle guy. I was a kid. I never rode motorcycles. I knew the outlaws. I knew who they were because they were prevalent where I grew up. And everybody's scared hell of the outlaws. But when I came home, I wrote, when I would come back to the house, I always took my stuff off, my cuts and all that stuff. I never took that into the house because when I looked at it, when I entered that door, I'd come through the garage. When I entered that door, that was my environment. You know what I mean? I didn't want to bring this negative, nasty, violent environment into my house. So that kind of helped me keep a balance there.
And I'm sure that was kind of like that would kind of mentally screw with you a little bit, right? Trying to turn it on and off. And
yes. Yeah. And there's and working undercover long term, like a lot of these guys have done. And just so I'll be honest with you, our generation, we didn't invent it. We had some fantastic investigators that came up from the liquor days and the older guys. Everything we did, for the most part, we learned, like everything else, it's passed down and we learned from the older guys, and so that was critical. And what we tried to do as we got older, and I learned from those guys, and we tried to pass on what we had learned. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's cool. What about the Walmart shooting case?
That was another home invasion takedown, a home invasion group takedown. And it was kind of funny because we kept doing these deals, these home invasion investigations, and some of them turned out in shootings. And then oversight from headquarters, they kept shutting us down like, hey, you can't use this anymore. You can't use houses anymore. It's okay. So we'll go to boats. You can't use the boat anymore. And okay, we use an 18-wheeler. We're putting the 18-wheeler. No, you can't use the 18-wheeler. But the Walmart was another one. Same thing. Rolled in to pick up, do the rip-off. The bad guys did, and then shooting broke out. And that was when we had the 9mm round, and those didn't perform so well. You know, bad guys were shot center of mass right in the chest, and they're out walking around smoking a cigarette after they, arrested. So a lot of lessons learned on that. But yeah, a lot of the home invasions were definitely high threat operations.
Yeah. And I guess people may not understand why you guys were working those type of cases. Can you kind of explain maybe some of the background of why, the home invasion cases and why ATF started doing those type of cases?
Well, there was a couple ATF agents in Miami that took an interest or said, hey, this is the problem, because they're going in it. There's so many innocent people were hurt or injured or killed. They hit the wrong houses. And it was so prevalent because, once you ripped off a drug stash house, you're set for life. You know what I mean? Depending upon the amount of cocaine. And it's a very violent situation. You didn't leave any witnesses, but it bled over, into the community, to the innocent people, like violent crime. A lot of violent crime does. So that's why there was an interest in it. It involved firearms and narcotics, which is, we enforce a lot of those laws. And there's two agents that I recall specifically that conceived a way to get these guys, to target them, to bring them into the ATF trap. So so there was a controlled environment, even though sometimes it turned into shootings. But it's a controlled environment, and you get these guys. Better for them to fight the ATF than to fight innocent civilians and do damage that hurt the innocent civilians.
Yeah, and just so people know too, there's a lot of process and planning that went into those operations. There's a lot of, without giving into the details because we don't want to give criminals a leg up, but there was a lot that went into to set up those cases, to get the information so that you could prosecute. And then when you guys would do the takedowns, there was a lot that went in as far as the planning to keep people safe. At the end of the day, people don't understand sometimes, you're dealing with violent criminals, and the criminals get a say, and you can only plan so much, at some point there's risk involved.
Right.
And I think I think in kind of hearing what you were saying is, you guys did what you could to try to mitigate those risks, but sometimes, the bad guys get a say.
And you got to look at the type of person that's going to say, hey, I'm going to tell you, hey, there's a house with 50 kilos of cocaine in it. All we got to do is go in, and we got to kill everybody because it's cartel, narcotics. So if they find out you ripped it off, you're dead. You know what I mean? So you got to go in. We're going to go in the house and kill everybody and rip off 50 kilos. There's a certain number of people in America that are psycho enough to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
you don't want that leashed upon
not
society.
Just goes to kind of ATF's mission too, of going after violent criminal offenders and trigger pullers, everybody that you were investigating for the most part. There was drug dealers involved, but most of those guys are trigger. That's why they're getting targeted. They're violent criminal offenders that pull the trigger, that do shootings, robbings, and those are the type of criminals that the agency prosecutes.
Right.
So you were a plank holder, an ATF special response team, the SRT team. Can you kind of give us a little bit about how that happened and came about?
Well, I think what happened originally, I was new, and ATF was getting very active in violent crime, and they were having some shootings, and somebody at ATF said, hey, they were having the local SWAT teams do the search warrants and do the hits. And there were shootings, and somebody at ATF headquarters or whatever decided that we need to do our own. We can't put other agencies at risk on our cases, so we need to develop our own program. And that's what they did. They took, first teams were called entry control teams, and they were city centric. You know what I mean? And then they developed it, and then went into special response team, like basic SWAT, like SWAT training. We went to training at Fort McClellan, and a great training at Fort McClellan. And they had different cities had the different teams, and then we just started doing you'd start basically operating as a SWAT team, and that was a lot of high profile, high threat situations like any SWAT team deals with.
Yeah, and just so the readers understand, ATF pretty much when you're hitting a search warrant with ATF, it's a gun case. So like SRT didn't go, and it's funny because most police departments across the U.S. now, if a gun involved in a search warrant, it's automatically, a high-risk SWAT warrant. that's all ATF ever does for the most part, is go after people with guns. So there was a different threshold, I'm sure, within the agency, because SRT wasn't big. I think there was only a couple teams at the time. You guys couldn't be everywhere. So what was kind of the determining factor on when SRT was used in those times versus not?
They came up with like a threat matrix. I think at headquarters, you had to, if it met this amount, you get so many points for the threat matrix, I guess, and it met that amount, then SRT had to be. And I think now eventually it got to be any high threat, ATF, SRT would do it. You know what I mean?
Did you guys get involved in a lot of shootings early on in SRT, or?
Yeah, we had some shootings. Yep. And then what you brought up was a good point too, though. It's kind of unique at ATF. Like, if you do a deal or a case with ATF, you want to go to a house and make a buy. You want there to be guns there. You want the bad guy to have pipe bombs. It's kind of illogical in a way, you know what I mean? Most cops or anybody had sane mind, right, would be like, I don't want to go into that house because there's could be pipe bombs or guns or whatever in there. We don't want any of that. But ATF agents, you're like, God, I pray that the guy's got pipe bombs or guns or whatever in there. So that's something that's kind of unique, in my opinion, to ATF. Just the clientele that they deal with.
Yeah, one of the things too I wanted to hit on, and I know it's been talked about all through the years, and I don't want to over talk about it, but I know you were at Waco during the Branch Davidian compound. Can you kind of tell us, from your view, just how your team ended up there and kind of some of your memories from that incident?
Well, I was on the Miami team, but we were not there for the original assault. We flew in the next morning to back up the agents that were injured, and of course the agents. We lost agents there as well that were killed. Terrible. But my opinion on the whole situation is, it's been bandied around, and people have said, "Hey, this is whatever." But ATF had a lawful search warrant issued by a federal magistrate, and to me, that's end of discussion. You don't argue that at the end of a gun barrel. The warrant's been issued. You acquiesce to the search of the warrant, and then you fight it out in court. That's my opinion on it. You know what I mean? And I think and whatever happened after the FBI stuff, I mean, that I don't have, really have an opinion on that. I'm not knowledgeable in that, to the degree to make an opinion on it. But the whole thing was initiated by the execution of a lawfully issued search warrant for that property. And those people, like I said, they made the decision to turn it into what it turned into. And I've traveled all over the country, and and I've heard different opinions, from people that think they know it all. But the bottom line is, I mean, if what would you do if the police came to your house with a lawfully issued search warrant? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, people hash this out all over the internet and politics and everything else. And, a lot of people don't understand what it takes to actually get a federal search warrant when the feds normally show up at your house. The investigation's done for the most part. That investigation most likely has been ongoing. There's been a lot of probable cause that's established. I mean, the threshold to get a search warrant federal system is actually a lot higher than some of the cities in the state system. And so I think that's something that's often overlooked. There was a lot of evidence of criminal activity, and you can argue the Second Amendment and all that. That's argued at Congress and the government. I know you probably have a different opinion on some of those things. I mean, it was always a joke from people that I knew that worked in the agency, that ATF was coming for your guns. A lot of the people that work at ATF are pro-guns,
yes,
very conservative viewpoints,
yes,
tons of former military, tons of
yes.
cops. And, there's always been this viewpoint that ATF is, these stormtroopers that just, love taking guns away from people. And that just couldn't be farther from the truth.
Yeah, it's not true. I mean, I can't tell you how many ATF agents I know. I say, why do you just come on ATF? Because I love guns. I mean, and I'm a strong believer in the Second Amendment. And but yeah, it's a false narrative.
Yeah. And that's something that we could have a whole nother podcast on that's driven by political motives and and agendas. And, ATF takes a lot of heat for stuff that's not always in our control. I was talking to somebody not that long ago, and, there's over 52,000 applications for silencers a week. And there's only 40 people in Martinburg, West Virginia that process those applications. That's not a lot of people. And, sometimes it takes a long time to turn around those applications. Well, what people don't understand is that's not all ATF's fault. FBI is actually who does the background, and there's no legal memorandum for them to do it in a certain amount of time. So half the time, they could get it done whenever they have time. So, it could take 2 weeks. It could take, 1 year. But of course, ATF is always catching the hell for it, but it's not their fault. And that's a congressional issue. I mean, that's, Congress mandates our budgets. That, the agency, from my understanding, has never had a personnel increase since its inception. And so they can't even hire more people, or they haven't, allocated more people to do that. But they're
always shorted. They're always shorted for political reasons. And that's a tribute to the ATF agents that still go out every day and make cases. And when I came into Miami, there was, I showed up in the shadow of two agents, Eddie Benitez and Ariel Rios, that were killed during undercover deals. And then Alex Diatri was seriously injured. And it's been going on for years. ATF agents have been wounded and during these operations. And we just had an agent last year in a community in New Orleans trying to clean up the community and make the community safer for the residents there.
Which is an extremely violent area.
Yes, and he was critically injured during doing the job. And it's going on every day out there. Guys and girls are getting up, putting the gun on, and grabbing the ATF badge and going out trying to make a difference.
Just, and I'm sure you don't have the answer, but just I'm sure people listening to this or watching this would want to know, how come ATF doesn't do a better job of, letting people know how hard we're working, or, what the agency's doing, et cetera?
I don't know. I really don't know. I thought about it, but sometimes it's for security operations during the, you don't want to tip your hand, and, like I said, it's a small agency, and it was really a small agency before I came on, so, and media and all that stuff when I was in, it wasn't like it is now, the push for, developing media and stuff, but that's a very good question. I mean, I don't have the answer to that.
Maybe somebody from ATF who hears this can.
I'm gonna call their 1-800 number after we're done with this, and we're gonna get an answer.
You know how that works out. So kind of moving along, I know you are also a plank holder in the enhanced undercover program.
Yes.
Which I know, I don't know that you would know this more than me, but I don't think there's too many other federal agencies that have a similar program.
Well, there are, and I'm going to go ahead and give a shout out to so basically, they wanted to develop a program. So John Cooper was actually my training agent who trained me, and he went to headquarters, and he went around. They wanted to develop this program, and so he went around to all the federal agencies at undercover training, the FBI and that those other agencies, and he went to all their programs and saw what they had. And then he created the program for ATF, and then Kim Baylaw got involved, and she was the program and the chief of the undercover branch. So they developed this whole program, and the objective was a lone undercover agent could drop in anywhere, and be totally self-sufficient. Have all the electronics equipment he needs, because you need to have electronics to record all the evidence, because without evidence, a record of the evidence, and it strengthens your case, and the quality of the recordings makes a big difference as well. And so you had all these equipment and training, and you could, if you needed somebody in Iowa to be a long haul trucker or whatever, then you could just boom, insert the undercover agent and let it roll.
Yeah, just kind of from talking to you and understanding like the EUP program. So ATF wasn't a big agency to begin with. And so, you may only have 4 dudes in Iowa doing investigations, and, maybe not be a big city, and, maybe they can't work undercover, or it calls for a typical or it calls for a certain persona that they may not have in that office. So this was kind of a really cool capability for you guys to grab agents from all across the agency, from all kinds of different backgrounds, Hispanic dudes, white dudes, so you have all these different kind of personas that you could drop into different locations of the U.S. And I'm sure that was kind of unique, and that was probably pretty unique at the time to be able to access that. Correct?
Right. And it's kind of like, sometimes I equate ATF like the Marines, like they do more with less than, any other fighting force. And that's kind of the way ATF is. They don't have a lot of resources, financial otherwise, but they always seem to get the job done. And they do it, they get it done well with, as far as the undercover operations and stuff, in my opinion.
Did you work undercover, like throughout, with other agencies, or was it mainly support state and local, or was it all ATF organic, or was it a mix?
It could be a mix of anything. Like, you could be farmed out, to other agencies. Like I did undercover for the FBI and other agencies. It just, whatever was needed, was Kim and John plugged it in, and who the people that followed them,
What kind of criteria, what did it take to get on, EUP when you guys were starting that thing?
Well, when they started, you had to go through an interview process, of course, but you had to have a work history. You had a summary, of the undercovers that you had done. You weren't just going to throw a brand new agent into the program. And it was limited. Once again, it was limited by funding for the recording and all the other support stuff that was issued to you. So I think the first batch was, maybe 15 agents or 20 agents, and so it was limited by funding, but yeah, that was how it was set up. Had some initial training, and you were blessed,
And you were with that program kind of as it progressed through the years, right?
Yes.
So I think you and some of the other guys, I think from what you were telling me, you guys kind of stood up a whole pipeline and kind of like, where to start, how to get there. You guys, I think, ended up coming up with some advanced training and courses too, right?
Yes. And it was kind of like being in a, casting, central casting. Okay, we need a white guy, that can, drive a 18-wheeler in Idaho or whatever. And then the branch would just, and you were obligated to do so many operations a year to stay active in the program too. So you just didn't get in the program and rot, you know what I mean? So you have requirements within the program as well to be active and be a resource that was available to everybody.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't understand what it takes to work undercover. I worked undercover in a very limited capacity. I did it on multiple times, but it was a hard thing, I think, for me with I was a street cop for a long time. I'd been in the military for a long time. You really had to kind of turn off some of your security senses, your cop movements, and try to not act like a cop, right? And I found that was really hard for me personally. I did it, and I had some successful cases, but man, to do it in the level that you did it long term, I don't think people understand quite what goes into that. And some dudes were just great at it and really excelled at it. What really drew you to working undercover?
It was challenging, for one, and like my boss, who I referenced earlier, Jim Fearson, his requirement was for the agents in his group, every agent had to do at least one undercover, because he wanted that agent to know what it felt like. So if you're going to be running an undercover deal and you had an undercover agent working for you, he wanted that agent to know what it felt like to be the undercover agent, because it's very stressful, right? So that was part of it. You know what I mean? That's how I got started.
Is it something you think that came naturally when you started doing it?
Well, I learned. I sat back. You don't just jump in. Like I would sit back and watch John Cooper, these other guys. You'd be a cover team, and you'd see how they interacted, and you see how they talked, and so you sat back and learned. Like a pupil before you actually got into the field. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, I know early on you had talked about a story too, which I thought was interesting. It's a good point to bring it up now. I remember you were telling me one of the first times you did undercover, you guys were taking down a crew, and I think you you gave, a verbal signal for your cover team. Cause people don't understand when you're working undercover, you might have a gun, but you don't have a vest. You don't have all your law enforcement stuff. You have a cover team that you're relying on to come save you if something goes bad. And, that's through, signals and words and whatever. But I remember you telling me you gave the signal.
Right. It was my first undercover, and I was buying stolen Flex X, which is a flexible plastic explosives that had been stolen out of Jacksonville. And this guy who worked for a gun manufacturer was trying to sell it on the street to one of our informants in Miami. And the informant basically had told this guy that it was going to be used to blow up a U.S. Marine base in the Philippines. So I met this guy in undercover capacity because I agreed to do it. And he shows up with the explosives, and I'm talking to him about it. And I said, hey, just to reiterate, it's going to be used to blow up a Marine base, barracks in the Philippines. And he basically says, I don't care. I just want my money. And so coincidentally, he was on his way to take his daughter up to she was a freshman and starting college, and she was taking his daughter up to Gainesville to move her into her dorm room. And so he just made a stop with the explosives on the way before he was driving up to Gainesville to take his daughter to college. But so anyway, I gave the takedown signal. There's a verbal and a visual, and they didn't pick up the verbal on the wire. And the guy just kept wanting me to get in his car and go for, get in the car, go for a quick ride after I'd already done the deal. And I thought that was kind of weird, So my training agent was a smart guy, had given me his dog to take on the deal. And I thought that was kind of weird. And I was like, why didn't you taking a dog? He said, cops don't take dogs to deals. I said, okay. Long story short, they kept missing the signal. So I used the dog in play to get out of the vehicle and give the takedown signal. And they came in and made the arrest.
Yeah. And I would imagine for a hot second, you can kind of get nervous, right? Cause you're dealing with somebody who's selling explosives, doesn't care what they're used for, works for a firearms company, probably armed. And so it's this weird feeling of, hey man, is anybody listening to me? Is anybody really watching me? And then,
Hello. This isn't how it went at the academy. Hello there. Yeah.
So I thought we talked through all these things. And,
it's stressful.
Yeah. I can only imagine. Do you remember any other times you were working undercover that you had some close calls or were in situations that, you had to improvise to maybe survive? Or
it was constantly. I mean, they constantly test you and stuff, and it just depends what situation you're with or who you're with. Or a lot of it's how you set up your backstory, and a big part of it is the informant, right? If you got a strong informant that holds rank, that's a shot caller or something, there's ways that they can control interaction the bad guys have with you and vice versa. So they're huge.
Cool. So you were in Miami for about, I think, 13 years?
13 years, yes.
Any other cool things or anything else you can think of?
I mean, that time back in the day, every day was a cool day. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Sit for hours and talk, and I used to feel like just a little kid, watching a TV show, just listening to you talk about, the stories. And law enforcement was different, especially in late 80s, early 90s.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, it's like, I had to testify in trial at one time in Vegas, and they kept hammering me on, you've never seen that much cocaine. How much cocaine have you ever seen? I was like, well, it's like we would hit a house. You'd help a guy hit a house. Another agent hit a house, and then you'd take everybody off, and then you'd see, cocaine from the floor to the ceiling. And next day in the gym, you'd say, hey, Mike, how many kilos you get last night? Oh, 75 or 80, and to them, they thought I was making it up because they never seen that amount, but it was just day to day. You know what I mean? That's the way it was in Miami. It was just off the hook.
So you end up finishing, your time up at Miami, and you end up coming down to the southwest border. What prompted the move?
Well, it was an opportunity to get my family closer to family, and I was gone a lot. And, it was basically, for family stability and another opportunity. I saw that when I got to the southwest border, I saw a lot of similarities to Miami back in the day, as far as the Wild West, out of control kind of stuff, you know what I mean?